Imagine discovering that every moment of pain in your life, every labored breath, every trembling hand, stems from a decision you never made. A choice sealed before you drew your first breath. Your mother is your cousin. Your father is your uncle. Your family tree doesn't branch outward like nature intended. Instead, it coils inward, a serpent devouring its own tail, and you are caught in its grip. This isn't the premise of a horror novel. This was the lived reality of countless women throughout history. Women born into Europe's most powerful families, yet condemned to lives of unimaginable suffering. Their crime: being born into bloodlines obsessed with purity, into dynasties that believed their blood was touched by God himself, too sacred to mix with common people. What these royal families didn't understand, what they refused to see even as the evidence mounted in twisted spines and clouded minds, was that they were creating a genetic catastrophe that would echo through generations, leaving a trail of broken bodies and shattered souls in its wake. The Habsburg family of Austria and Spain perfected this art of self-destruction. For centuries, they married cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, weaving a family tree so tangled it resembled a noose slowly tightening around their own descendants. Their motto celebrated strategic marriages, but there was nothing strategic about the horror they unleashed. In the shadowed corridors of Europe's grandest palaces, behind velvet curtains and golden frames, children were born carrying the sins of their ancestors in their very bones. These weren't fairy tale princesses living happily ever after. They were victims of a system that valued political power over human life, that saw women not as people but as vessels to preserve a bloodline that was already poisoned beyond saving. In Vienna, 1634, a child enters the world already marked by her family's obsession. Maria Anna of Austria takes her first painful breath in the Hofburg Palace, and from that moment, she will never know a day without suffering. Her spine curves unnaturally, forcing her small body into a hunched posture that makes every breath a conscious effort. Her jaw protrudes so severely that eating becomes an ordeal of careful chewing and cautious swallowing. Servants must cut her food into pieces so small a child could swallow them. Yet even then, mealtimes become exhausting battles against her own body. But Maria Anna is not unique. She is not some random victim of disease or accident. As she grows older, wandering the portrait-lined halls of a palace prison, she begins to understand the terrible truth. In every painted face staring down at her, she sees echoes of her own deformities. An uncle with the same protruding jaw, a grandmother with the same twisted spine, a gratin whose eyes hold the same look of resignation and pain. She realizes, with the clarity that only suffering can bring, that she is not the beginning of this curse. She is merely the latest chapter in a story of genetic catastrophe, a living testament to what happens when power matters more than humanity. The palace physicians visit her regularly, their faces carefully neutral as they document her condition with clinical detachment. They measure the curve of her spine, the angle of her jaw, the weakness in her limbs. She becomes a case study, a living specimen, proof of what everyone knows but no one dares speak aloud. Her suffering is not random. It is the direct result of generations of ancestors who chose to keep their bloodline pure, who believed that marrying within their own family would preserve their divine right to rule. They whispered about the Habsburg curse in hallways and drawing rooms, but never in her presence. To her face, they spoke of mysterious ailments and God's will, as if the Almighty himself had chosen to torture this child for reasons beyond mortal understanding. But Maria Anna knows better. In her books, in her voracious reading that becomes her only escape, she discovers worlds where people marry for love instead of lineage, where children aren't born carrying genetic time bombs planted by their grandparents' choices. Yet reality always intrudes. Potential suitors, themselves her cousins, recoil when they see her. Marriage negotiations begin with optimism and end with awkward silence once her condition becomes known. She remains unwed, not by choice but by circumstance. Too deformed even for a world where marrying your cousin is considered normal and proper. If you're drawn to these forgotten stories of history's hidden victims, the women whose suffering was buried beneath royal pageantry and political intrigue, please consider subscribing. These stories matter because they remind us that behind every crown and title were real human beings who felt pain, who suffered in silence, who deserved better than the fate, genetics, and obsession handed them. Your support helps bring their voices out of the shadows and into the light they were denied in life. Maria Anna dies at 32, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated weight of genetic damage. Her death certificate lists various ailments with impressive medical terminology, but the real cause is never written down. She died because her ancestors valued power over people, purity over compassion, and she paid the price in every painful breath she ever took. From Austria, our journey takes us to Spain, to perhaps the most heartbreaking figure in this dark tapestry. Born in 1479 to the Catholic monarchs who expelled entire populations and funded voyages to unknown worlds, Joanna seemed destined for greatness. Instead, she became a cautionary tale written in madness and suffering. Her parents were cousins, part of the same web of European royalty that had been marrying within itself for so long that genetic diversity had become a forgotten concept. The seeds of her destruction were planted long before her birth, encoded in the very blood her family believed made them superior to ordinary people. Joanna's madness wasn't apparent in childhood. She was intelligent, educated, fluent in multiple languages, showing every sign of becoming a capable ruler. But the first cracks appeared after her marriage to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. The name promised everything. The reality delivered nothing but pain. Philip was unfaithful, manipulative, cold as winter stone. Joanna's response was an obsessive, all-consuming love that her family and courtiers quickly labeled as madness. But was it truly insanity? Or was it the natural response of a woman raised to believe that marriage was her highest calling, that producing heirs was her sacred duty, only to find that marriage had become a battlefield where she was constantly losing ground? Her mind, already vulnerable due to generations of inbreeding that had made mental illness common in her family line, began to fracture under the pressure of constant humiliation and emotional abuse. When Philip died suddenly in 1506, Joanna's grief transformed into something darker, more obsessive, more disturbing. She refused to allow his burial, traveling across Spain with his coffin, opening it regularly to gaze upon his decomposing corpse. The image is horrifying, the stuff of nightmares and Gothic tales, but it speaks to a deeper truth about her condition. Her father Ferdinand, and later her own son Charles V, used her behavior as justification to lock her away. For 46 years Joanna lived in confinement in a royal convent, kept in conditions that would break even the strongest mind. Dark, cold rooms, minimal food, denied basic hygiene and human dignity. Her attendants reported that she would go weeks without washing, that she would tear her clothes to shreds in fits of rage or despair, that she would scream for hours at a time until her voice gave out. But here is the question that haunts historians even today. Was Joanna truly mad from birth, cursed by genetics and destiny, or was she driven to madness by her circumstances, by decades of isolation and abuse that would break anyone's mind? Modern scholars increasingly believe her madness was largely political, a convenient excuse to remove a legitimate queen from power and install male rulers who could be controlled more easily. Joanna died in 1555, still imprisoned, still officially mad, still written off as an inconvenient woman who couldn't be trusted with power. Her death barely registered in the public consciousness. She had been erased from memory decades earlier, transformed from a legitimate monarch into a cautionary tale about female hysteria and the dangers of letting women rule. These women, Maria, Anna, Joanna, and countless others whose names have been lost to time, were not villains or cautionary tales about vanity and pride. They were victims of a system that treated them as breeding stock, as political pawns, as vessels to carry forward bloodlines that were already poisoned. They suffered in golden cages, their pain dismissed as female weakness or divine punishment, their voices silenced by men who never had to face the consequences of the genetic catastrophes they created. Their stories remind us that behind every crown and royal portrait were real women who felt pain, who struggled to breathe, who wanted nothing more than to live normal lives free from the curse of their ancestry. They deserved better than what they received, and the least we can do now is remember them not as footnotes in history books, but as human beings who endured unimaginable suffering with whatever dignity their broken bodies would allow. In the end, the obsession with pure bloodlines didn't preserve power or divine right. It created only suffering, generation after generation of children born to pay for their ancestors' pride. The Habsburg jaw, the mental illness, the physical deformities, these weren't signs of divine favor or pure blood. They were warnings written in flesh and bone. Messages from nature itself that some boundaries should never be crossed, some prices are too high to pay even for empires and crowns. What do you think about these forgotten women of history? Should we remember them as victims or as survivors who endured what no one should have to face? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Their stories deserve to be heard, and your voice helps keep their memory alive.